Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Performance Audit and Risk Committee. We're a bit thin in the chamber here this morning. I don't know how many of you are watching online, but welcome to those that are. Madam Governance Advisor, do we have a quorum for the...
Yes, you do, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So we do have a quorum, so we can commence business. So just give me a little moment and I'll just... Right, we now have the system up and running, and I should say no, I didn't. It's what's to do it again.
If we move the apology of lateness for Councillor Percival and approve leave for the
And I'm happy to second both of those, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Holding. Sorry, it's an apology from Councillor Percival. He's not coming this morning, so yeah, he is otherwise engaged on farming activities in the pouring rain. And yes, and also for Mia Kircher, who is off due to illness. Right, so the apologies for Mia Kircher and Councillor Percival. So we moved. Councillor Holding, seconded Councillor Hopkins. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? We'll declare that carried. Declarations of interest. No particular declaration of interest. Thank you. All right, confirmation of the previous meeting minutes of the meeting on the 14th of June 2022.
Happy to move, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Anybody else? Oh, seconder? Seconder, Councillor Halalali. Thank you. Any comments, questions on those minutes from anybody? No, we'll take those minutes as read. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. And against, clear those that carried. Memorandum reports. Financial summary and overview for the year ended 30th June 2022. Mr. Hope is not with us today. He's online, but we have Mr. Wells, the county manager, here beside me in Mr. Hope's place. So don't know whether Mr. Hope, whether you want to make any comment or I'll just leave it to Mr. Wells. Right, leave it to Mr. Wells.
Quite happy to leave it to Mr. Wells.
Yep, thank you, Paul.
You just have to sign into this thing again. So what this paper is doing is providing you with a very high-level summary of where we're at the moment. This was prepared a day or two ago. It shows an operating surplus for council for the year of projected to be 975k against a budget of 4.5 million. And the first thing I would say is that that's at variance with the reports that we've provided during the year, which have shown financial returns, financial results that were at or better than budget. A factor in those earlier reports was the timing of revenue related to both the Tranche 1 water funding and to lotteries funding for the museum project. Both of those elements of income were received generally in the period up to period 9, which is March. And in fact, lotteries funding was finished in October. The bulk of the water Tranche 1 funding was related to specific projects with maximum amounts that could be claimed for each one. So as we reached those maximum amounts, we could claim no further funding for those. So now we're completing those works using internal loans and other funds. And then, of course, the main overall reason for the decline in revenue for the year is down to the recognition of revenue related to the events centre. The budget called for about $2.8 million of grant funding, which was not received because the project has yet to be confirmed. But I believe that fundraising has proceeded quite satisfactorily, and there is funds available for 2023. So that is really the first table, the revenue table. Are there any questions about revenue or the overall result that's projected? As I've said, it's a snapshot. It was prepared the other day, and already the operating surplus is projected now to be about 1.1 million. So there's a slight improvement, and that will change as further numbers are finalised over the next month or so.
Right, thank you, Mr. Wells. And like as the report states, it is a high-level summary, and it's at a date, as you mentioned, and the details will continue to amend or to change as details of the annual financial statements are finalised. So just here, as you mentioned, Mr. Wells, like the budgeted revenue 61.8 million and came in at nearly 0.8, which was accounted for primarily by the reduction in the funding for the Sports and Events Centre. So
effectively, that's the major change.
Major thing, yeah.
If we move to the second table on the following page, we're looking at expenditure.
Oh yeah, Councillor Hopkins, yeah.
So I want to ask one question in relation to revenue, if I may. I just want to ask one question in relation to revenue. Bullet point 2 says a dividend received from Whitestone Contracting at 32K. Now that's the first I've heard that that's what they're offering this year. Now, as I understand it, as a shareholder, we're not obliged to say thank you very much. We can, if we choose, require more from them. I mean, there are other instances where other local authorities have done that from CCOs. So I just pose the question, when were we told this? Are we happy? Do we believe there might be room for further discussion with them? Is it a fait accompli?
Mr. Hope, you might be the best person to answer that question, so I'll perhaps pass it over to you.
Yeah, happy to do that. The amount provided is in accordance with the dividend policy that was set out in the statement of intent. So yeah, it is a direct reflection of the results that Whitestone achieved in the 21 financial year. They haven't announced the result for the coming year. Yeah, Councillor Hopkins is correct that other local authorities have essentially placed demands on some of their CCOs in terms of the level of return. That is not a place that council has gone in the past, and not as what is reflected in the SOI. So yeah, it would be quite a major departure from previous practice.
Right, thank you, Mr. Hope. So that answer your question, Councillor Hopkins? Yeah.
Yes, it does. And I'm not necessarily enamoured of the idea of requiring more. I'm simply saying, I just wanted to clarify the point that we're not actually obliged to say thank you very much. That's it. We could have discussions with them should we choose.
Well, yes. I think Mr. Hope said
exactly. The reason Paul was given us a perfectly persuasive. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Right, Mr. Wells, on to the expenditure side.
Yeah, so if we move to the second table of expenditure at the top of the following page, we've signalled throughout the year that employee costs would be under budget, and that's proven to be the case. We've also signalled through the year the warning that depreciation would exceed budget, and that's largely, if you remember, due to the effect of the revaluation of 3 water assets at the end of last year, which was not accounted for in the budget or in the LTP for the current year. Things that may stand out: contractors and consultants and professional services. Now, contractors are under budget. Consultants and professional services are well over. But I think the better way to look at that is to add the two together, noting that actual is projected to be 18 million and the budget was 19 million. So in fact, it is a saving overall. Consultants and professional services includes the effect of the audit fee, includes solicitors and lawyers' costs, as well as what we consider consultants. And in some departments, there is a fine line between what is a consultant and what is a contractor. So, yeah. Finance costs we have reported during the year as being over budget, but it's not materially over budget. And going back to the revenue table, you'll see that finance income is also over budget. So that's also been signalled through the year. We will give you a further and more intensive review of other expenses. They are over budget, but there's still some movement in those numbers. So are there any questions about the expenditure table?
Right, thank you, Mr. Wells. Simon, turn yourself in.
I'm just interested in how we decide what we're going to comment on in the text below, because to your verbal update just now, we've spent $1 million more on consultants and professional services than we'd budgeted for, but we're silent about that. Yet in the expense comments, we talk about 80 grand over budget for IT and electricity. And it feels like I'm just interested in why we decide to talk about that and not talk about the $1 million overspend on consultants.
Yeah. Thank you, Simon.
We need to finalise the numbers perhaps, and so we can comment further on that in our later report, which would be the full financial report that we would provide 23rd of August. But as I said, consultants are overspent according to that, but contractors are underspent. Some departments regard consultants as contractors, some departments regard contractors as consultants. So there is a difference of opinion depending on where you are in council as to what we're talking about. So it's probably better to finalise the numbers and then provide a more detailed response at the next meeting, if that's okay. But as I've said also, if you add the contractors and consultants together, you get an underspend of about $1 million.
Thank you, Ian. And just on the point of the defining whether it is a consultant or a contractor, who makes the final call at the end of the? You do. So,
no, it's purely up to the department that's engaged the specialist. I mean, you could regard them all as external services.
Yes.
It's just a matter of definition.
Right. Which seems a little bit, I wouldn't say, something that could be clarified for the departments to actually have instructions as to what is a contractor and what is a consultant. So every department does actually put things in the same area.
Yeah, it would be good to be consistent. So that's something that we could work on moving forward, I guess.
Thank you. And Councillor Halamali, turn it off in. Thanks.
Yeah, just a comment, because I think it's in relation to also the savings and the employee costs, because we're not able to employ the skill sets that we need in-house to be able to do the work, and that's why we're having to reach externally to do that, which isn't always a good thing. Like we've always talked about growing our capability within the organisation. So I think it's just a reflection of the trends and patterns that we're having to face.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. I'm sure that's exactly correct. And Ian, there will be some of the consultants, contractors would be to backfill areas where you're short-staffed, I would assume.
Yeah, there is an element of that, particularly in the regulatory space. The planning and building consent work it does involve a lot of external help and advice. We're also using consultants quite extensively in the district plan, and we've been using solicitors quite freely in, for instance, the renegotiation of the Observatory Village loan and some other things that cropped up towards the end of the year that we're not expecting.
Yeah. Right, thank you, Ian. So any other questions on the expenditure, Councillor Hopkins?
Well, question more like a comment, but the other chart on that page, capital expenditure.
Mr. Wells, come to that next
Oh, okay, right, sorry, that's fine.
Yeah, just.
Yeah, so the following table is around capital expenditure. We've always looked at these segments of the business, and I can report that capital expenditure is now increased to about 20.2 million. So we're still gathering information and working towards finalising the report. Three Waters is notable for being over budget. It's the only one that is, largely. And that's because, as I've said in the comment, it was incentivised by the receipt of the Tranche 1 funding. Without that, it's questionable whether some of those projects would have proceeded. Parks and Recreation reflects the fact that we've not done very much on the Sports and Events Centre. That should kick off with an intensity in 2023. Questions?
Right, thank you, Mr. Wells. So, Councillor Hopkins, you had a question on that?
Well, more a comment, but again, there is now a consistent trend where our budgets are not being met, and there is something systemic that needs to be addressed. I think we either need to prune back our assumptions as to what we can do in any given year, so that the actuals are closer to the budgets, or we need to find some ways to accelerate things that aren't getting done when we want them to be done. I mean, it's one or the other, really. It seems to me it's either capacity or, well, it's capacity in one sense or another. Capacity or over-ambition in terms of budgeting or delivery.
Mm.
Yeah, so it's over to you guys, really, when we are looking at budget workshops to question and cut, really. What are the priorities? What should they be? And do they align with your priorities? So you'll have another opportunity to slash and burn when we come into the 2024 annual plan.
Yeah. And just one question from me, Mr. Wells. On the property is under from 5.6 million and 2.4 has been spent today in this draft report. And you mentioned the Holmes Wharf totaled 532 against a budget of 1,980,000. I actually thought the Holmes Wharf redecking project was going according to plan. So I was a little bit surprised to see that variance.
As I've said, this was a picture at a point in time, and it may be that we've had further expenses on that since. But Holmes Wharf has been a very, very long duration project. It's been on the go for a number of years. And in fact, it doesn't feature in budgets. It features in the carry forwards, which you also have a chance to review and cut if you wish. And you'll be looking at those in the next month or so. And that's another opportunity to say, well, why are we going to be spending this money? But all I can comment on is those are the numbers that we had a week ago.
Right, thank you. Mr. Hope, you wish to make a comment?
Yeah, thank you. Just, I suppose, firstly, as a summary, as a wrap up of this report, and we're not quite there yet, but it would certainly be helpful to officers if elected members highlight any areas where they do want expanded explanation provided in the 24 August report. I think we've already got some indicators in that area. And then just to Councillor Hopkins' questions about delivery. Yeah, it is important to remember, and we have reported it's not only capacity of council, but it has been a very unusual year in terms of capacity of external contractors. We know that was certainly had quite an impact in the roading space, and in the Parks and Reserves area, particularly something like Duntroon Toilet, where we've actually had the toilet available, but the contractors to actually install it and get it operational, there was a 4 to 5 month wait. So it's an unusual market we're operating in. So yeah, we will provide more of a breakdown and an explanation of some of these contracts because it is a variety of reasons. But yeah, we will still need to have a serious review of our, not only our capacity, but the external capacity, and have something that's realistic and we're reporting on more regularly.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hope. And I think the point has been made that external contractors are a major factor in whether work is completed or not. And with the acceleration of the Three Waters program, that's going to be a factor in the year ahead, whether contractors are available to do the work that council wishes to have done. And so, right. So the next page, Mr. Wells, is the key elements of the statement of financial position. So.
Yeah, so these are just highlights from the balance sheet. Property, plant and equipment is well over budget because we are now projecting the revaluation gain for the property, parks and airport revaluation will be around 30 million rather than 7 million. Loans to other entities is over budget because of the renegotiation with Observatory Village and taking over the loan to that entity from the health company. Other elements are pretty much there or thereabouts when it comes to budget.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, did you just say that we're revaluing property, plant, parks and the airport, and the value is going from 7 to 30? And if so, are we going to actually do any work on anything we might unfund by way of depreciation or the like? I mean, that's astonishing.
Yeah, so the LTP projected a revaluation gain of around $7 million, and we are projecting over 30 million. And that's in effect, that's the result of the property market, the types of buildings and types of land that we hold, and the fact that it's a 3-year gap between this and the previous revaluation. So there's 3 years worth of property gain to be picked up. But most of that, of course, has happened in the past year. But we are in the hands of our professional advisors when it comes to that. So not much we can do. However, you're right about unfunding depreciation. We can do that and lower the impact on the ratepayer. But of course, for financial reporting purposes, we must still adhere to our accounting policies regarding depreciation.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. And just on that point, you're 4.3, the New Zealand audit plan and fee, this matter is discussed there in terms of revaluation. The auditor has pointed out several, so we'll come to that under that discussion. So, Mr. Wells, just a question. Oh, sorry, Mel, you have a question?
Yeah, just I guess following on from that and just looking at how we deal with those kind of things, because I agree around the unfunded depreciation, but I think we also need to have a long-term plan on how we actually still approach that, because if things are going to cost more, we still need to find that money. But whether there's a stepped approach along the way, recognising it's 3 years between valuations, whether we unfund a huge number, but actually slowly work our way up to that total or something like that. I just wonder whether we need to have a bit of a strategy sitting in behind to deal with these step changes.
Yeah, just so going back to the audit report, which we'll discuss shortly, it may not be 3 years nowadays. The revaluation is required if there is a material change in value. Is it the word, Mr. Wells?
Yes, so if every year we are required to undertake a fair value assessment, and that does involve dealing with our professional advisors, getting their feel for movements since the last revaluation, and then applying our our policy on significance. And if those indications are that the values have moved to a significant extent, then audit would require us to complete a full revaluation based on that and bring those results to account in that year. So we're currently providing or preparing fair value assessments on both roading and on the Three Waters. and roading is a concern because unit rates have skyrocketed. So we are doing extensive work in that area currently.
So the end result will be the assets will increase in value. The council will be worth a lot more money on paper as to the net value of council, but in real terms, it's still the same body at the end of the day. So I just have one question, Mr. Wells, and just on the very last bullet point on that page, second under key point is to remember, you talk about other non-trading losses and gains, and you talk about the significant component of the cost as in previous years, directly related to the works undertaken by the water department and pipes replaced and left on the ground are otherwise abandoned. Referring to the level of capital spend in the current year, we must expect a significant expense will have to be recognised, but this yet cannot yet be calculated. So what you're saying there is that the pipes replaced and left on the ground are abandoned. Are they written off? But then the new pipes being laid under the Three Waters program are capitalised. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So that has been our practice over the past, well, probably the past all the time that I've been here. When you replace a section of pipe, the practice is to basically leave the old pipe in place because it's not economically viable to, or there's no benefit in lifting it out and scrapping it. So the value associated with that pipe or whatever other asset it may be is effectively lost, and that loss must be recognised. And that's recognised as a non-trading loss. And we don't historically include those in the budget because we have no basis on which to compute a number. So we are kind of stuck there. But offsetting that, we expect vested assets will be or could be larger than normal because we have clarified the ownership of a number of community halls, which we didn't appreciate previously that we actually owned. So now we'll bring those into the books, and the offside of recognising those as assets is to record an income item.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Councillor Hopkins?
Well, I'm just curious, surely under asset management plans, we have a depreciable life of a pipe. And surely by the time it's replaced, it would have no value at all, ergo no write-off cost. So aren't we making a rod for our own backs that we don't have to?
It's true that we should, if we were doing asset management planning to that degree, we would know that that section of pipe was going to be replaced in 2 years' time, so therefore only has 2 years worth of value left. But that really is fine-tuning. And I'm not sure whether that is something that we are able to do. It's something that would have to be taken up with the people who do that. Yeah.
Well, sorry, it's a very quick supplementary question. Can't we assume from a depreciable and accounting point of view that the fact that something is left in the ground written off means it has no value? In other words, the act of abandoning it equals the fact that it is valueless. Isn't that a legitimate accounting assumption to make?
Yeah, it very definitely is. And that's why we wouldn't carry those assets in our books, and audit wouldn't let us. It's simply not done. I mean, the asset doesn't exist anymore so far as we're concerned. It exists physically, but it doesn't exist in terms of providing a service. So there's no point in continuing to record its existence and depreciate it until it has no value.
So that's, Councillor Hopkins, that's the heading there, the other non-trading losses. Yeah. So it's a loss, it's a write-off, which is the same as a loss. And it's a non-trading loss, it's just an asset which has reached the end of its life. And whatever book value is still recorded for it would be written off as a loss. So there would have been depreciation claimed over all the years. It's only the residual value at the end which is written off as a loss in the year when it's abandoned.
Yeah, so effectively the revaluation process looks at all of our assets and assumes they have a life of a certain period. And this is where asset management and asset planning comes into play. We should be able to say our plan is to replace that in 2 years' time, therefore only give it 2 years' value. But that doesn't seem to be how all of our asset revaluation processes work. But that's that's the end of the report. If there are any other questions, now's the time.
Yeah, well, perhaps I'll just make the members aware that we've been joined by the audit director and manager at 9:30. So we're almost, I think, almost finished this paper. Simon, are you wishing? No, okay. Any other urgent question before we put the resolution and have Councillor Hopkins, second Councillor Kingan. All in favour, please say aye. Against? Declare that carried. Right now, we might just skip the strategic risk update in the meantime, Amelia, and we'll jump across to the next paper, which is the Audit New Zealand Audit Plan and Fee. So, and Mr. Thomason.
Yes, they've joined.
Joined, all right. The need meeting room, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Thompson and Ms. Hills, Rudy and Jenna, and welcome to our meeting. Are you there, Rudy? Yep. Just waiting for a moment while the auditors come online from Dunedin. Yeah.
Sitting in a little room in Wellington. Neil Armstrong on the moon.
Can you hear us?
Yes, hello, Rudy. Welcome, Mr. Thompson and Jenna, Ms. Hills. Welcome. Thank you for your attending.
You have a very funny view. Just click on that.
All right, we can see you. A moment ago, I could see you very clearly, so we can hear you very clearly. Thank you, Rudy. So, yeah, welcome to the meeting and thank you for your participation. And we're just starting on the paper now to discuss it, Rudy. So, I think of the major part is the audit plan. Does any member want to make any comment before we hear from the audit director? No? Well, the floor is yours, Rudy, if you want to take us through your audit plan and tell us what the matters of emphasis are this year.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I agree with the conclusion in the cover paper that basically states that it is important for members of the FAR committee to have a good understanding of the nature and scope of the audit. The page numbers I'll refer to in the audit plan will be the numbers as they are in your document and not the numbers in our document. So I think that'll make it easier. So there are a number of significant issues that we will be dealing with in this year's audit. The first one is talked about on page 22, which relates to the revaluation of land and buildings. So the revaluation is a complex exercise, both for the valuers and for the auditor. So that has not been valued since 1 July 2019. So if the values mirror what we've seen in the rest of the country, we would expect quite a significant uplift. On page 23, we talk about fair value assessments. So fair value assessments are typically done in years where a revaluation is not done. So the two major asset categories that will be subject to fair value assessment this year is roading, which was last revalued in, I think it was 2020, and free waters, which was last revalued in 2021. Depending on the result of the uplift, it may indicate that a full revaluation should be performed. So we are keeping in touch with Mr. Hope and his team, awaiting the results of the actual assessments. Also on page 23, it talks about the impairment of property, plant and equipment. That is a sort of a value assessment relating to assets that are not subject to valuation. And it's basically an assessment that management makes as to whether any of the assets carried at cost is impaired for some reason, like maybe it's been damaged by flooding, earthquake risk, or buildings that are carried at cost that aren't occupied, etc., etc. So not such a significant exercise compared to the revaluations and fair value assessments, but still something that's required under the auditing standards. On page 24, talk about the group consolidation. So the material components of the council consolidation or the council group is Whitestone Contracting and Waitaki District Health Services. Something to maybe just make the committee aware of. On the Waitaki District Health Services side, the board has indicated that they will not sign our audit engagement letter for the 22 audit. So, the audits that we need to conduct now, neither will they approve our audit plan. And it's highly unlikely that if we go ahead with the audit, they will sign the letter of representation. This is all coming from the board's view that they cannot commit to anything relating to the OV group. Worst case scenario, what this may mean is that Waitaki District Health Services may choose not to consolidate the OV group. That will obviously lead to a qualified opinion. That qualification will flow up to council, and I haven't really explored this, but I would expect council will have to then deconsolidate the OV group if the decision is to mirror the Waitaki Health position. So council's accounts will be qualified as well. Currently, I have sent the matter back to the Office of the Auditor General legal. They are looking into what the options are. So that was a couple of weeks ago, and we haven't heard anything since. So it's just something that I will keep Paul and Alex appraised of as we go through the process. Also on page 24, we have procure to pay. So that system was implemented, I think, in April 22. So what we've decided to do is to really focus on the implementation of procure to pay for the 22-23 year. So that's the first year that it should be fully up and running and used by most of council. So for 21-22, we will sort of have two systems that we'll have to review and audit. The one is obviously status quo, as it was in the prior years, but we do have to look at how things changed. I think it was towards the end of April to the end of the year. So we will do that from an audit perspective. We won't rely on any expenditure controls. The idea is that if the implementation was properly executed, the necessary controls put in place, there would be the possibility that for the 22-23 year, we could actually start relying on controls in the expenditure area, which would obviously reduce the amount of audit testing that we need to do. I think as far as the the letter is concerned, the audit plan is concerned, those are the only things that I want to highlight. I'm happy to take any questions from the committee.
Right, thank you, Rudy, for those comments. So yes, very interesting. There's some matters to consider this year for sure, as there always is. So perhaps going through just from the start of your letter, the points you raised, first of all, the revaluations. Any questions on that from any of the members? Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, look, I just want, on page 23, you're talking about the fair value assessments in a non-revaluation year. And your second paragraph says, for those assets that will not be revalued this year, we expect the council to perform a comprehensive analysis to determine whether there is a significant variance between the fair value and the carrying value that would trigger the need for council. Isn't that revaluation by another name? And I mean, aren't you sort of imposing a cost on us that is additional to the revaluation that we're going to have to do, and that may, in my view, be therefore unnecessary or unfair?
Through the chair to Councillor Hopkins, it's not us imposing, it is the accounting and auditing standards that require this. A fair value assessment is a very high level revaluation. So typically a 1 to 2 page document I've seen before. So from a cost perspective, not nearly in the same league as a valuation. It is true, though, that if the fair value assessment indicates that there has been a material movement in the value of assets, then the choice goes back to council.
Oops, I think you've disappeared, Rudy.
Okay.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, Rudy, we just lost you briefly, but you bounced back again, so we can hear and see you. Thank you.
Thank you. And just on the same topic, Rudy, I'm back on page 20. I lost my page numbers at the bottom. Page 22. You do refer to the revaluation of assets, and in paragraph number 1, 2, 3, 4, the council has also to ensure that the land and building assets owned by all significant components under the group audit system, that would also include WDHS, the hospital, and the Observatory Village group. So bear in mind your comments earlier regarding the OV group. Would that also be a departure there as well?
That's correct. The OV group actually has a policy of revaluing their land and buildings every year. So in a non-revaluation year, we actually have to get them to reverse that adjustment, because at a group level, you are supposed to have the same accounting policy. So council's accounting policy is not to revalue every year. So in a revaluation year, we need to make sure that Waitaki Health revalues. So they have been instructed, and they, I think, have sourced the valuers. So the valuation is either in train or it is scheduled. OV Group has revalued, and Whitestone Contracting is also revaluing. So yes, it's just a quirk in the accounting standards that at a group level, all accounting policies must be consistent. So, you know, we make sure when we issue the group instructions that the individual entities are aware this is what's happening at the parent level. They need to make sure that they do the same.
Thank you, Rudy, for that. Mr. Neal?
Look, I guess I was just wanting Rudy to maybe get a feel for you on whether you think there is a risk around the fair valuation resulting in a full valuation. So given that last financial year we saw a significant uplift in the value of our water assets, we've just had a discussion now from Mr. Wells about significant uplift in the value of our parks and other assets. From your experience, do you see there being another significant uplift this year? Because if so, that's something that's a wider issue that the council is going to have to think about.
Through the chair to Mr. Neal, there's definitely more of a risk in the roading area. seeing that it was valued, what, about 3 years ago now. So what we are seeing in some areas of the country where valuations have already been performed is 100 to a 200% increase in some of the rates. Some of that in the water assets as well. Obviously, it's impacted by geography and, you know, a lot of other things. But I think if council is looking at a risk, I would look at the roading, and that's by far the most material asset. So yes, I would definitely be expecting a proper fair value assessment will point to material movement in roading. Free waters, less sure, because as you point out, there was a revaluation in 2021. But yeah, you know, the way contract prices have been moving, it's not impossible, but unlikely.
Thank you, Rudy. And in your report, Rudy, you do state that the council should agree on a significant variance threshold above which council would complete a revaluation. Can you give any indication based on other councils you may deal with what the threshold, significant variance threshold would be? What sort of percentage? Or is it a value rather than a percentage?
Well, it will be a value. I mean, we do list our materiality on page 31. So I guess the number that we would be looking at.
Yeah, so is your materiality and our materiality the same, based on the same measures? No,
but I guess so our materiality for the assets would be, and this is probably in total, would be 104 million, 105 million. But again, you know, that's from an auditing perspective. I guess I wouldn't expect council's materiality to be that high, but it is an internal decision, because obviously that affects depreciation. It can affect useful lives. Well, it won't affect useful lives. It will affect depreciation. So, yeah, I don't offhand have an example of what councils have used. But I guess the information would be out there. I can make some inquiries that will be of assistance.
Yeah, that'll be of interest. Thank you very much, and thanks for raising it. I'm sure it's something that elected members and council staff will put their mind to. So that's page 23. Impairment was discussed too, but I think that's probably pretty transparent, is it? That assets are worth less than what they're worth. There is a reduction of value taken into account. Procure to pay, that's something that's been on your radar for a number of years, really, from an audit point of view. So it's good to see that P2P implementation went live mid-April.
Yeah.
Now, the consolidation, really. Yep, I'm just, I'm just looking for consolidation. Okay, yeah, we've gone past it, okay. Yeah, so top of page 24, group consolidation, and the comments you made there, Rudy. So Deputy Mayor Tavendale wishes to make a comment, question?
Yeah, probably more of a comment, and I'm not a member of the committee, but just obviously I do have a conflict in this area, being a director on the Otaki District Health Services Limited. I just wanted to clarify what our position is there. Essentially, the directors on Otaki District Health Services are uncomfortable with having to, I guess, sign for the reporting of their Observatory Village Retirement Group, and the fact that we actually don't have any control over that group, so we can't actually put our name to the line, and there's risk there personally for each of us. So we're quite happy to sign for the activities of the Otaki District Health Services, but we are uncomfortable with the risk posed to directors on signing for another group that we have zero control over. And that's what our stance essentially is. We're happy to sign for us, whether it can come and be done separately in some way. But I understand the requirements from Audit New Zealand, but I think that we also need to protect our, ourselves.
Yep. Thank you, Mel, for those comments. And yeah, certainly just a bit. I think we understand that. And but as Rudy pointed out earlier, it's not Audit New Zealand, which is Rudy and Jenna. It's the Office of the Auditor General in Wellington that contracts Audit New Zealand to do the audit work. And so yeah, we wait for Rudy for what you might say regarding the OAG legal team looking at options to try and resolve this long-standing difference of opinion between audit and council and the hospital and the OV group as to whether it is actually controlled by the hospital and then therefore comes through to the council consolidation. So, yeah.
Mr. Chair, just to clarify, that ruling has been made. So, based on council and OV and Waitaki Health representations to the OAG, they have come back and confirmed that the status quo remains. So they have reaffirmed the position. So this that we're dealing with now is the flow-on effect of that. So obviously we need, as auditors, we need to do a lot of work on the actual consolidation at both council level and at Waitaki Health level, including a review of the OV group auditors' work papers. And obviously if that group is going to be excluded, then, I wouldn't want to do that work. So it's vital for us to know sooner rather than later what the company's position is going to be and whether the council as the parent will sanction that. Because if I know upfront I'm not going to be consolidating the OV group, then we can work on the basis that the opinions will be qualified. And we can then, exclude a lot of unnecessary work.
Right, thank you for that clarification, Rudy. So, Mr. Neil, you.
So, thank you. Look, and Mel, I really appreciate the update there. I guess it feels like there's a really, really strong likelihood that Waitaki District Council's audit will be qualified this year. Because of what's going on. The Office of the Auditor General is not going to change their stance, and you've made that clear, Rudy. So really dumb question from the floor. What are the implications of the council receiving a qualified audit rather than a full audit? Are there any financial implications? Are there any credit implications? Are there any other risks associated with it that we should be aware of now?
Well, perhaps, Mr. Hope, are you the one perhaps the best person to answer that question?
Yeah. Probably as good as any, because we'd need to see the nature of the qualification. It would be reported to Parliament as part of the Auditor General's report on the annual reporting round. The only matter that it's probably new to us would be a discussion with the local government funding authority agency to see whether they would have any concerns about it. But given it is a pretty technical qualification and nothing to do with council itself, but all about the group, which of course they don't lend to the group, they only lend to council. I think, so it would be a qualification on sort of the group accounts, which are of course council's accounts as well. I don't see them being particularly concerned. So no, it's not like our credit rating or anything else would be harmed. It is, I suppose, reputational, and the matter being raised in Parliament are the key concerns. So. Yeah, it's probably
I think we would
be a corporate. Sorry, Rudy. Yep.
I think it'll probably mirror the qualification you had in 2019 when the issue first came up, and it didn't have any impact because it is a group thing only. I think the concern I would have is for the directors. So under the Companies Act, non-compliance with accounting standards is quite a serious matter. So, yeah, from a legal perspective, I think it's the directors of Waitaki Health that will be exposed.
Right, thank you. Mel, here as a director.
I guess my comment is that the directors are exposed no matter which way we turn on this one, which is an uncomfortable place for them to sit.
Just a question to Paul, through you, Mr. Chair. It did occur to me when I read the Office of the Auditor General's defence of their position, which would argue about, but that's neither here nor there. And we can presumably challenge that in court. I mean, the Officer of the Auditor General is not above the law, I would have thought. Surely we could seek a judicial review, should we deem it appropriate. And it does seem to me that this is a convoluted, arguably, definitely contestable view of things that's having a huge adverse impact on us. And if needs be, I think we should actually push back a bit and maybe consider judicial review. What's your view on that, Paul?
When we looked at this initially, it is difficult to find essentially a venue for it to be heard, because it's not a legal matter. It is an interpretation of an accounting standard, so it's like trying to get a judge to decide an accounting treatment by essentially one of Parliament's expert on accounting treatments. There's also not a minister that we can essentially raise the matter with, because the Auditor General, for very good reasons, is an officer of Parliament rather than hidden inside a department and accountable to a minister. I mean, I know Health Services is reviewing potential responses, and we'll discuss those with them, but it's not quite the Auditor General as a law unto himself, but he is an independent officer with quite strong statutory powers and quite a bit of discretion about how he exercises those. So it is an interesting issue, but we'll continue to pursue it. There's also potentially some other ideas that I haven't had a chance to discuss with Rudy, but I think once we've done that, we'll probably report back to the committee as well as in terms of what council's options are. It's a challenging position for everybody.
Yeah, thank you for those comments, Paul. And I think we just have to note that we know that position, that challenge is there, and we will work our way through it. But it does sound that if it's not resolved and the annual financial statements are qualified by audit, that it's not the end of the world, and hopefully life would just carry on as per normal. So just quickly, we're going through, just looking at page, going on further in the report, page 42, 43 is the audit letter, and which Rudy referred to before and said that the hospital would not prefer to sign their letter. I note this was signed by this is dated May 21. So it was a letter that covered 2 years, the 21 year and the 22 financial year, which I signed on behalf of council way back quite some time ago. Point just on the bottom of page 43 is an indication of the audit fees. So that's the audit cost, which of course has varied in past years if there has been extra work which has been required, which wasn't included in the audit fee indication. So just to let people know what the fee is. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, look, a couple of questions. One relating to that, and I'll ask that first, and then one going back to page 26 and the whole matter of fraud risk, where I also suspect we may perhaps be vulnerable. The letter indicates a considerable number of extra hours in earlier years, and it's showing that you don't anticipate extra hours this year, and therefore, in fact, the charges are higher but lower, if you see what I mean. Are you confident that we're in a position to actually deliver what you want without gobbling up more hours? So that's question number one, and I'll come to, if I can ask the question about fraud after I've heard your answer, Rudy, I'd be grateful.
Chair, I'm intrigued as to how our audit fee interacts with fraud. But if I can answer Councillor Hopkins firstly, no, I'm not confident that we can deliver the audit for 856 hours, but we have been limited in the fee that we can charge. So there was a cap placed on the increases in both 21 and 22. Obviously, the fee or the actual hours are being distorted to some extent by COVID, but we are definitely implementing some strategies in order to get the hours down, in order to get to a reasonable base for performing the audit. And once we know what that is, we can look at, this is the true cost to actually do the audit. So John Ryan has definitely indicated that, he wants to move all audits to a sustainable fee. For Waitaki, it's not 856 hours, but it's also not 1,700 hours. So it's been a bit difficult getting an accurate base number over the last couple of years because of COVID and some other one-off items. So currently, the only way the fee will increase for the 22 year is if we do additional work. So, for example, if we have to audit another valuation, that will add a cost because the fee just includes one valuation, which is the land and buildings one. Or if we have to do some additional work on the procure to pay, or we have to do some additional work on, a qualified opinion or deconsolidating, etc., etc. So the actual hours to do the audit will not be a factor in determining the 2022 fee.
Thank you, Rudy, for that explanation.
Just very quickly then, looking at the page 26 and 27, fraud risk, and you've got there what role does the council play in relation to fraud? How do you monitor management's exercise of its responsibilities? Has a robust fraud risk assessment been completed? These are questions that you are presumably going to ask elected members. So what I want to know from you is how are you going to do this? I think this is very important, and arguably it's an area where structurally we're not as good or thorough as we could be or should be. But I want to know what you intend to do by way of teasing out council's perception of its role and what, if any, weaknesses you think, what, if any, weaknesses we may think we have. So are you going to come to this committee and ask? Will there be a Q&A session with you guys and us, or how's that going to be done?
There are two options, Councillor Hopkins. We do get management and council to complete a fraud questionnaire, but my preference would be to have a discussion with council directly. So once we've got the questionnaire, to have that discussion in a part session of either the park committee meeting or the council meeting. I think that gives some more real value assurance that we're all on the same page.
I agree. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for that, Rudy. And just on that same page, Rudy, 26, the group audit timetable. From your point of view, from the audit team resources, are you confident that the audit can be completed on the time frame set out? Or?
I knew this was going to come up, Mr. Chair. We can currently only commit to the statutory deadline, so I can't commit to a timeline per se. we're currently resourcing all audits that have a 30 September deadline that hasn't moved. And only after that, we'll be in a position to sort of make a call on what's going to happen with other councils and material subsidiaries. Hence the importance of making sure that we resolve this OV consolidation issue, because that will make a material difference in the time allocation. So, you know, that sort of runs hand in hand. And obviously, if we can't complete the Waitaki health audit, which is a material component, then that will flow onto the council.
Indeed, thank you, Rudy. Yes, we look forward to then perhaps being advised in due course when those TBCs to be confirmed can be replaced by an actual date. So, but I understand your position. All right, members, is there any other further questions, comments on the audit plan and fee? No, there doesn't appear to be, Rudy. So thank you very much for your input and Jenna as well for the meeting, and we'll hear further, I'm sure, in those matters in due course.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, thanks, Jenna.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
So, members, just back to page 19, which is the recommendation. Who to move? Councillor Hopkins. Seconded, Councillor Holding. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Declare that carried. Right. Well, Amelia, so we can now refer back to the strategic risk update on page 16. And just welcome to the PAR committee, Amelia. It's your first meeting.
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
it is. Yeah.
Indeed.
So I'll try to be quick, just in the interest of time. So to pull out some sort of headline pieces from the paper, we are seeing an improvement in COVID-19 related risks. So we've got the external facing risk, which is kind of based around what we expect to see from the government. And we've changed the sort of description of that risk from being based around lockdowns and what might happen around that to actually just more uncertainty and management and reactivity to what goes on. And obviously then we've got the internal facing COVID-19 risk, which we're seeing is not as severe in impact as we might have thought originally. We are seeing staff absences, but they're being well managed, and hopefully as we kind of get to the end of winter, we'll see them sort of reduce. In terms of increasing risk, the top increasing risk relates to default from a borrowing entity. So that now sits at 3 on the top risks after the increase in likelihood. Roading maintenance contract remains the top risk. So work is continuing. We're hoping to see that reduce as that contract is actually agreed. The eagle-eyed amongst you may have noticed that in the body of the report there was mention of heat maps, which have just been passed round. That's mainly just a visual so you can see where the 21 risks on this spreadsheet go from their inherent or raw rating down to their residual rating. Now, in an ideal world, we'd see some of those in the high orange section moving down, but the very nature of strategic risks means that they are heavily influenced by external events that we have little control over. So other than that, I'll take questions.
Right, thank you, Amelia. And I just note on your risk heat map that there are 2 in the red under the raw risk, but then there are none in the red under the residual risk. So that is a factor of, can you perhaps explain why they've dropped from the under the raw risk to the residual risk?
Yes, so those two, so two that are sitting in the red extreme category in the raw are the roading maintenance contract and failure of closely related organisation. So essentially, the raw is if we sat and did nothing in relation to those risks, we expect that that would be an extreme outcome. But currently we've got some mitigants in place, and we think those mitigants bring those down to the high category.
All right, that makes complete sense. Thank you for that. Right, members. Yep, Mr. Neil. Amelia, turn yours off, please, Amelia. Thank you.
Just to follow on from that, Amelia, you've got the roading maintenance contract being the highest risk, which I'm interested in because I'm just about to go into the TET for that. But we've got a raw. The reason that it's so high is because we've got a raw financial risk of 12, right, which is catastrophic. I'm struggling to get my head around how a $4 million a year contract that's been budgeted to go to about 6 million already has a raw risk of 12 for us, a raw financial risk of 12, and how we've got it down to a 7. Because it's about 4 million a year. We know that it's going to go up. We've budgeted for it to go up. So it's not like we're seeing unbudgeted significant financial risk associated with this.
Simon?
So I think that, looking at the tables, I think they've got those printed out. I think that's in relation to the bottom point on the financial box of the catastrophic impact rating. So the unanticipated costs or losses of over 1.5 million, which is quite a low threshold for what would be the top level of impact. So I think that's coming from there.
I just question whether it's unanticipated when it's something that we've already built into the budget.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think unanticipated in terms of our own internal engineers' estimates, Simon. So I was surprised. Yes, yeah, yeah. Whether it's catastrophic is a different matter. It's I
don't follow that.
Yeah, it comes down. I assume council will have can decide whether they wish to maintain the same level of service or reduce the levels of service, and therefore reduce the cost. So there's an option to maintain services or reduce services, and that has of course, a financial impact. But
that wasn't the nature of my question. We know as a council that the new TET costs are going to be significantly higher, and we've budgeted for those to be significantly higher. My struggle is to understand, therefore, where the $1.5 million or greater than of unanticipated costs comes from, because we're anticipating this cost.
Sorry, clarification either from Ian or Paul. I'm not sure that we had budgeted an increase. I recall raising this question at when we were looking at the annual plan this year, and the roading contract hadn't changed, and I asked if it should, given that we hadn't got a contract and it may go up. And we were told, at least for this first year, that everything was okay and we wouldn't need to. Well, that's my recollection. So I'm just trying to get a handle on whether we have actually budgeted for significant increases. Maybe in the longer term, yes, but short term, no, I don't think.
Mr. Wells is keen to respond.
Absolutely. At one of the workshops for the annual plan, I recall one of the significant moves was a change in the roading contract, and I seem to remember 600,000 or 800,000. Now that may not be where Councillor Neil is negotiating at the moment, but it's there is an allowance in the annual plan for a reasonably significant increase.
Okay.
But it was definitely still unknown at that point.
Mr. Hope?
Yeah, thank you. It's can appreciate Mr. Neil's comments, but it's really just taking a look at the wider sector results that some councils are seeing, and I suppose being, yes, we've made some allowance, but we're still very unsure about what the final outturn of this might be, and that's why we've continued to raise it with elected members, and why it sits where it is because of, I think, the potential. We still look at the worst case, and then, what is the likelihood? And it's just a couple of very big unknowns. So that's just the way we've assessed risk. Yeah, hopefully that it drops very significantly over the next 2 to 3 weeks. But then we're also, in a very delicate position at the moment. With the TED about to meet and consider this. So we just wanted to keep raising it with elected members because it still has a potential impact that council will need to potentially make some other mitigating decisions about it.
Right, thank you, Mr. Wells and Mr. Hope. I think it's a matter that we'll hopefully be advised further on in the very near future. So any other comments, questions on the report? And the tables? Oh, yeah, Hannah?
No, thank you. I think every time that we meet, like I see the strategic risks register, and I always struggle as a governor to try and evaluate and monitor everything from a governance lens, because this is still very quite operational. I guess what my question is, are we going to look at developing a good performance framework that we can use to help better evaluate this in future? We're looking very much under the hood with this, but we actually need to evaluate it a lot more with specific key areas that we can actually focus on so we can monitor the progress over time. I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but that's why I struggle with just looking at this. And while I have metrics here, I actually need a proper overall framework.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree that some of the risks in here are more operational than strategic. So over the next few months, that's going to be a key focus of mine, is to, write the policy, because we don't have one currently, start building the framework, and the next quarterly risk-focused PAR, I'll be bringing something that looks slightly different with some further information, and also we'll be looking to do some training and development on what it means, what you guys should look for, and how to interpret the information that you are provided with so that you can use it to make decisions and ask the right questions.
Right. Thank you, Amelia. We look forward. You've only been with council a short time, so we look forward to your input as time progresses. So thank you for that. Simon?
Sorry, I just had two other, one question and one comment. So the other question on risk item 3, we've got here as one of the mitigants, independently appointed members of the governing body. Is that LGFA? What does that mean? What is independently appointed members of governing body as a mitigant against loss of funds?
That's due to financial failure for borrowing entity, yeah.
Yes, so Paul can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe that relates to the actual borrowing entity in question. There are independent governing bodies there that will review their activity.
Yeah, no, that's correct.
Okay, I'll take that offline and try and get my head around it a little bit more. And the second one is just my continual bugbear that of the 20-odd top risks that we've got. There's nothing about climate. And last week was a great example of how climate change is a huge risk for us as a community.
Absolutely. I think it is quite a glaring omission. So as we move to get this into a strategic register, that will definitely feature.
Right, Melanie?
The only other thing I've seen missing from there, and it was only after a few discussions over the last week, was around the political element that we're just entirely silent on, like whether we like it or not, whether it's elections and changes of direction and things, or whether it's an elected member, speaking or doing some damage, I guess, in a public realm, that kind of thing. Like, I know it's uncomfortable to speak about, but that should be on our risk register because it's a very real environment that we work in.
I'm sure Amelia will take that point on board.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll note that one down.
All right, well, if there's no further discussion, someone like to move the recommendation? Moved Councillor Holding, seconded to Councillor Neil. Sorry, independent member Neil. Yes, right, indeed. Councillor Holding, sorry, Hopkins, what am I saying? Hopkins, yes, indeed, yep. Yeah, H and O's, yeah, indeed, yes, indeed. So Councillor Hopkins and Mr. Neil, all in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Declare that carried. And that ends our business. So with that, I'll declare the meeting closed and thank you all for your input, and any people watching online, thank you for your interest. We'll now end the live stream.
Have to celebrate the media.